I'm going to show you how to change brakes and rotors on a Mazda CX-5. This is a 2016. We're going to do the rears. If you find this content helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. So here's our vehicle, 2016 Mazda CX-5. And we're going to change the rear brakes, which have an extra step in it because we need to disengage the parking brake. So in order to put the parking brake into service mode, we turn the vehicle on, but leave the engine off. We verify that the parking brake is not engaged, and then while holding down the accelerator pedal, holding down the parking brake button, we then hit the ignition switch 3 times. If you've done that correctly, you will now put the parking brake in service mode, and you can hear it retracting in the back. The other thing you'll see is that this is now engaged. And now just turn the vehicle off, and we can start working on the brakes by loosening the lug nuts while the vehicle is still on the ground. We're not taking the wheel off on the ground, we're just loosening the lug nuts. Then we jack up the vehicle with wheel chucks under to prevent it from rolling back. Lift the vehicle. Now we can get the lug nuts off since we've already loosened them, and take the tire off. Place the tire and the lug nuts off to the side. Now we need to loosen the slide pins. These don't have a lot of pressure on them, so they should come right off. I think it was a 14 millimeter, and those come undone pretty easily. So just put those to the side and save them. With the slide pin bolts out, you can now remove the caliper. And what I do is I either use a coat hanger or a rope so that I don't damage the brake line. And in this case, I had a shoestrings laying around, so I just tied it to the door handle of the car, and it worked pretty good. So you could see supported, tied, and the brake line has no pressure on it. It's out of the way so we can work. So what I did is I applied some penetrating oil to the caliper bracket bolts. These are held down with about 70 or 80 foot-pounds of torque, so they're pretty tight, but they came off pretty easy. I think these were 19 millimeter, if not 17 millimeter bolts. And then I just backed them out with my wrench. And I haven't removed the old pads yet, but we're just going to take the whole bracket off as a whole. Save those bolts. And now we have the bracket and old pads off. Now I couldn't just remove the rotor. It was stuck on there a little good. You can just whack it with a hammer, but I'm going to show you a little trick in case you want to save them. You just put penetrating oil on the inside here. And sometimes that can loosen them up. And you hit it with the dead blow hammer instead of a normal hammer, and maybe you can save the rotor. But we're getting rid of these rotors since they were so bad. Now I just clean up this mating surface, and I'm just going to wipe it down just to remove any of that loose rust that was keeping it seized down there. There's the old rotor. You can see this edge has grown too much, and we were only getting about half that pad being used. So clean everything up. Now we got our new rotors from AutoZone. Come with a 3-year warranty. Probably just going to replace them right before that warranty's up. I found that these do pretty good in mountain driving, the Duralast Golds. So we're just going to put them on there. Nice and easy. Now we can attach the bracket back on. And just don't cross thread these. Make sure they go in nice and smooth. Thread them up. And then we're going to tighten them down. So there they are, nearly tightened down. At this point, I'm going to remove the old brake pads, have a look at them. You can see how badly they're wearing unevenly. That kind of damaged portion isn't doing that much braking power. You want to remove these old brackets. You should get some new ones with the new pads. Now we can tighten down the bracket bolts. There are 75 foot-pounds, so I just tightened up with that little wrench first. Then I gave them a couple turns with the leverage wrench, the 1/2-inch drive. And with the caliper still out of the way, I brought my torque wrench back. Like I said, they need to be about 75 foot-pounds. I don't mind going over with something like this, so going over isn't a bad thing. I do it from time to time. With those torqued up, now you want to lubricate the slide pins. I'm removing some of this ceramic brake caliper grease. This is what was on there. After some research, I found that this stuff is a lot better, this AGS brake lubricant. So we're going to apply this onto the slide pins only. This is only for slide pins. At least that's what I'm doing. And I just spread it around with my finger, and then we stick it back in there. Same thing with the bottom one. You know this is the bottom pin because it has a little plastic black guide on the end. Now what I do apply is some of that purple ceramic brake parts quieter, just a tiny, tiny bit, as you can see, on the mating surfaces of the new metal clips. Like this, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit where the metal meets this little clip. Then you secure those, make sure they're on there nice and good, and then that's what holds the brake pads into place and allows them to squeeze correctly. So here's the new Duralast Gold. They all have these little wear bar indicator, all 4 pads, so it doesn't matter what side you put them on. I put a little of this ceramic brake parts quieter, Permatex purple stuff on the back of the pads too. I'm sure you could use the AGS stuff, but I decided to use the purple stuff. They're a little tricky to get into the metal clips, but this is what they look like when you get them in there. Now you can slide the other half of the brake caliper on after we push this pin in. Now this is the dangerous part. This is why you needed to disengage the parking brake, because we're going to use the old brake pad and I'm going to compress this caliper just enough so that we can slip it on, because the new brake pads are thicker. If you don't do this and you don't put the parking brake in service mode, you could damage it. So it's super important to remember to put the parking brake in service mode. So we slip it on there. It's relatively easy. Line up the slide pin holes so that it does in fact slide on in the correct place. Then we secure these bolts. Now these slide pin bolts are only 24 foot-pounds of force. Do not over tighten these. Breaking these would be a nightmare. You just need a little bit of force, 24 foot-pounds. Do not over tighten these that much. A couple foot-pounds is fine, but don't break those off. So with everything secure, you can see the brake, the new rotor pads and clips. The brake line is not bent in any sort of way. Everything went back correctly. I'm now spraying down the rotor with some brake parts cleaner just to make sure we remove any oil that might have happened to get on there. Now I can put the tire back on. Just line that up. Put on your lug nuts. Get them all on just relatively hand tight. Then lower the vehicle slightly once you've got them as tight as you kind of can. Now tighten them in a star pattern going across from each other, evenly tightening all the lug nuts, and then torque them down. General rule is to torque them to at least 100 foot-pounds. This one might even be less, but you're usually good at 100 foot-pounds. Now, after you do this, don't forget to take the emergency brake out of the parking brake out of service mode, and you do that by turning on the vehicle, but not the engine, holding down the accelerator, holding the parking brake button, and pressing the ignition 3 times. You can now hear the parking brake start to engage, and it should be back in, but it depends on how much you compress the piston, so you may have to try this again, do this twice, or just engage and disengage the parking brake just to verify that it works. Again, you might have to do this 2 or 3 times to get it out of service mode. Please like and subscribe.